Hello, everybody. Hello.
Sometimes I feel discouraged and think my work's in vain. But then the Holy Spirit revives my soul again. I won't be satisfied till I see my Jesus. See my Jesus breaking through the line. I won't be satisfied.
Hey, y'all.
Oh no,
Oh, no.
oh no, I won't be satisfied.
Hey, thank y'all. I've been wanting to dress like this for a very long time. Finally got my hands on one, and personally, I must say I look great. Thank you. Hey, y'all. Hey, y'all. Hey, y'all. It's a new moon. It was a new moon. We're still in the new moon phase. So I'm here with a new moon reading for you for July 2021. I don't care what zodiac you use. I don't care what sign you think it is. I've got a word for you today. And yeah. I had all kind of things in my mind this morning and yesterday. Just thinking about what this moment right now means. And Gemini, man, Spirit has been dropping a lot of just insight and perspective to me about Gemini. It's a sign I'm familiar with in terms of experiencing it, as in my mother, my adoptive mother, my biological mother, my biological father, and my middle brother all have Gemini stelliums in their birth chart. Woo! Y'all, I'm gonna tell you this. Gemini is a mutable sign. All mutable signs, this is about truth. This is about how we come to know. How do we know what we know is what a mutable sign asks. So we're talking about Gemini, Sagittarius, Pisces, and Virgo. And because each of those four mutable signs has a different element that means that each mutable sign knows what it knows via a different tool. So I'm gonna circle around and come back to Gemini, but we can start with Pisces. Pisces knows with the body. There's no words here. There's nothing tangible, no evidence. There's no books. There's no research. There is no spreadsheet, data, analytics, anything like that. Pisces knows through the body. It's a spontaneous knowing that combines instinct and intuition. I call it intangible knowing. Then we can go to Sagittarius. This is fire. So fire is about the will, the conscious mind, your awareness, what you can consciously recall. Fire changes things. It changes anything it encounters. Fire is about taking up space. So when we're talking about Sagittarius, we're really talking about conviction and belief. We're talking about convincing. And so you know what you know with Sagittarius because you have a story, you have a belief, you have a conviction that you bring to everything. And it's the metric, the context that you use to interpret what you encounter, including yourself. Then we get to Virgo. This is Earth. So Earth is about tangible, what you can touch, what's physical, what you feel, right? In a sensate, sensual touch kind of way. And so for Earth, Virgo knows because it has quantifiable material evidence. It counted, categorized, organized, It analyzed, it aggregated, put it in a spreadsheet, calculated it, analyzed the syntax and the grammar to know what something means, to know what the truth is. And so when we come back to Gemini, where we are now, the new moon in Sidereal Gemini was July 9th here in America, and Gemini is air. So Gemini knows what it knows because it read it, it heard it, right? Through words and language, conversation, communication, listening, hearing, right? The wound of Gemini is being gullible, right? Now, in the spirit of exploration, hey Jada, in the spirit of exploration, in the spirit of discovery and curiosity, in the spirit of encountering something new for the first time, there has to be a kind of openness, a lack of judgment, right? The judgment that Sagittarius would bring, right? The judgment Sagittarius brings is that I have this existing belief system, this political ideology, this religious doctrine, or whatever it may be that informs what it is that I encounter, how I interpret it and understand it, including other people, myself, animals, the whole world, ideas, everything. So Gemini approaches things without that judgment. And because of that, it can be kind of gullible. Now, why would Gemini be gullible? Gullible means unable to discern whether or not something is true. I'm going to say that again. Being gullible, which is the wound of Gemini. That's not the wound of Gemini. I just lied. That's the coping strategy of Gemini. The coping strategy and mechanism of Sidereal Gemini is gullibility, which means lacking the discernment or judgment to accurately know if something is real or true. How does someone come about using the coping strategy of being gullible? And when I say coping strategy, I don't mean lightweight, I mean survival. Why would someone have to be so suggestible in order to survive? Right? Well, the wound of Gemini is not being believed. And when you are not believed, you cannot trust yourself. Trusting yourself is a process that comes by people affirming and confirming your perceptions and understanding. And so when your perceptions and understanding are overridden, undermined, negated, ignored, erased, you learn that your eyes, Gemini sun, what you see, what you know, Gemini sun, you cannot trust. So you need to seek out more information. Ask more questions, read more books, ask more people. Gemini moon, you cannot trust your body, right? Gemini Jupiter means that you cannot trust your own judgment, your own capacity to tell a story, to interpret what you're experiencing, right? Jupiter in Gemini, this is an undermining of your own experience. Jupiter in Gemini says you cannot trust the conclusions that you draw from your own personal experiences. Your own personal experiences are not a valid metric for making sense of the world. And so you need to outsource your judgment. You need to read books. You need to get a lot of degrees. You need to take another course. You need to ask and interview a lot of people so that you can kind of, by some kind of consensus, come to truth. But for Gemini, how much information is enough information? How many people do you have to ask to confirm that you're sleepy, Gemini moon? Why do you need to interview your friends and loved ones to find out if you're sleepy? Why is it that before you can even sit with the sensations of your own body. Why is it that someone hopped in and told you, oh, you could not be feeling that. You could not be hungry. You just ate, Gemini moon. You could not be sleepy. You just took a nap. You couldn't be sad. There's nothing to be sad about, because look at us all around you, Gemini moon. We don't have any feelings about it. So obviously your feelings, right? This is being gaslit, right? That your perception of things, what you know to be true, is not true. And even more than it not being true, it's that someone else knows better than you. What happens when someone else always knows better? How do you know who to trust? Right? This is the work of Gemini. The work of Gemini is to not keep seeking out more information. Don't Google, don't read so many books. You don't need to take another course. You don't need another degree. How can you make sense of the information that you already have? How can you take an assessment of the relationships around you? Who can you trust, Gemini? Who can you trust to affirm what you feel and what you know? Who affirms what you know and what you say? Who comes in and says, I know better than you? Right? I know better than you. Right? So, in the 2021 Sidereal Astrology Guide, for the month of January, for the month of January, oh Lord, for the month of July in the back here, the fill in the blank for the new moon in Gemini says planting new ideas through conversation. And so you are instructed to find the house in your birth chart that has Gemini. Where is it down here? In the houses in my birth chart table, that's 7 for me. So I go to the house meanings table and I find house number 7. And that is what I fill in the blank here for the new moon in Gemini and for Mercury in Gemini. So where are new ideas being planted through conversation? Where are you learning and where are you listening? Right? How are you finding new language? You know, the theme for July, I talked about this in my July 2021 horoscope, which is up here on Instagram. The theme for July here at the beginning says, for July, decolonizing the language of liberation. Man, I want to jump to the monthly summary of July here in the guide, because the first couple of paragraphs really defines this moment, as well as there's a particular question here in the guide that's really important right now. So I'm reading from the 2021 Sidereal Astrology Guide that can be found in both a digital PDF and a printed and bound workbook version like this at shop.thepeoplesoracle.com, or you can go to thepeoplesoracle.com and click shop. Both guides are right there to be shipped or downloaded immediately. So July reads, air represents the imagination, which allows us to see and experience what may not actually exist in our reality, right? So for Gemini, that imaginative capacity has been taken advantage of at times in your life, right? People take your suggestibility and kind of undermine your trust in yourself, right? Air is language. It's words as symbols which name and create worlds. So Gemini is the actual words, right? Now we have an opportunity to imagine what does not exist and to name things into being. And sometimes the thing that you're naming, not just for Gemini, but for everybody, the thing that you are naming is yourself, right? So this might, particularly if you have Gemini rising, right? This is you. This is your physical body. This is your actual person that you might be finding the language to name, finding the language to understand and perceive the truth, right? Planets in Gemini, particularly at the new moon, give us a moment of respite and a breath of fresh air via trines with Jupiter and Aquarius. So the first trine is tomorrow, second trine is Mercury in Gemini trine Jupiter in Aquarius. Air has mostly been missing from all of the transits and configurations that have dominated the past 18 months. We must look back to Jupiter's transit through Libra 2017 through 2018 for clues about what that element means and how it may show up for us at this time, right? So, the flashback to 2017, 2018 just so happened to be connected to the Jupiter and Libra transit then, which I call justice for and by women. And from that, we saw the Me Too movement, we saw the Time's Up movement. And then, of course, during the 2018 midterm elections, we saw, in 2018 generally, we saw more women being elected to office than had ever been in world history, and not just in America, but all over the world. I think we got the first woman prime minister in New Zealand, right? So this is the rough part of air that we are dealing with at present, which is the wound of all air signs. So we're talking about Gemini, we're talking about Libra, and we're talking about Aquarius. So the wound of all air signs is about erasure and invisibility. Erasure and invisibility, right? And erasure and invisibility comes because who you are, what you're capable of, and what you know is erased. It's not acknowledged. It's not validated. It's undermined. Something else is superimposed on you. What you know through your body, what you know through your own experience, what you are capable of because you can do it, right? Who you are because you're inside yourself, you experience yourself. All of these things being erased and taken from you. And then you just become a projection screen for someone else's authority, someone else's claim to the power to name you, the authority to make you something, Aquarius. Someone else's superior knowledge, Gemini. And someone else's power, force, will, Libra. One of the ways that I have observed the emergence of air over the past month is through collective dissociation. Here we are, July 10th, 2021, in a very similar place as we were March 2020, where there is clear evidence that something is wrong. Something's wrong. But somehow life goes on. I tweeted about this yesterday, but we, especially here in America and elsewhere, but I'm going to speak for America, that's where I am. We are in the midst of ongoing trauma. Ongoing trauma honestly, there's been a lot going on always in America, but I think that things changed with 2017. Things were already changing, but 2017 really did something to us. End of 2016, 2017. And we were just in this collective experience of trauma that was just going along on this increase. And then we just got a vertical increase of traumatic events in 2020. I want to take this moment to take us back because we forgot. We forgot what happened in 2020. We don't remember what happened to us. In 2020, a virus that basically suffocated people and drowned them to death ripped across the globe. America had all of the warning signs, had the privilege of not being the first place. We watched China. We watched Italy. We watched over 5,000 people a day die for days and weeks on end. And if that wasn't enough, we were left exposed and vulnerable to harm and death by the very people who we actually pay to use our resources to protect us. As our loved ones were dying alone in hospitals, as our loved ones were suffocating to death, our government told us that there was nothing they could do. They told us that the death of our loved ones actually was not happening and that there was nothing to be afraid of. And if that was not enough, May 2020 came. Many of us watched, and there's a trigger warning here, police violence. So I'm going to pause for those who don't want to hear this. You can put your phone down and leave the room. But if all of that was not enough, May 2020, excuse me, and the days and weeks that followed, we saw a man cry out for his mother as he was being murdered by the Minneapolis police. That triggered something. It was too much. We broke out of our homes and spilled into the streets and screamed, demanded justice, demanded to be seen and acknowledged in the way that we see ourselves. The whole entire world yelled in one voice that Black lives matter. People filled the streets for weeks on end. They took back what was theirs from the corporations who had been stealing from them for generations. The news called it rioting and looting. The police reacted to a challenge of their authority by more violence. We said, stop harming us. Stop killing us. Stop being violent and brutal towards us. And they responded with more brutality and more violence. And if that wasn't enough, just when it seemed as if we might have gotten the pandemic under control, bereft of clear leadership, rightly discerning the nature of the threat we were facing, people hopped on planes and traveled to see their relatives November and December of 2020, leading to more deaths than we saw in March and April and May. Understand, we are in the midst of a trauma loop. We are currently experiencing trauma while recreating the trauma that we already experienced last year. There's a collective mania happening where we just avoid and disregard, cannot even draw into our memory the reality of the consequences that come with walking around without masks. Over and over and over again, we have been neglected. Over and over again, we have been left hungry. We have been left cold. I forgot about Texas in February. I forgot about all the hurricanes at the end of 2020. It's too much. Some of us carpe diem and YOLO, right? Hey man, we gonna die anyway, so it is what it is. And that's cool. But my thing is that death is not certain unless I take my own life. I might catch COVID and be stuck on oxygen, unable to play with my child. We are in the midst of an insurgent, authoritarian crackdown. It's happening here, now. And the trauma is so compounded that we cannot even see what's happening to us. We're doped up on antidepressants and we're depressed because we've been neglected and abused violently over and over and over again. And so we just want some peace. And capitalism says the peace is in the pill. Take this. What happens when your trust in your own capacity to know what's real is undermined? This is Gemini. What happens when you are looking at something with your own eyes and everyone and everything around you is telling you that what you're seeing is not real? What happens? What happens when, before you can even take stock of your own knowledge and awareness of something, you are bombarded with images of other people completely unaware of what you're witnessing? Do you trust your own eyes when you see something that no one else sees? Or do you try to figure out what everyone else sees? This is human nature. If I'm out and it's a tiger coming, I don't have time to sit there and wonder if it's a tiger. If I see everybody running, I'm gonna run too. I ain't gonna ask no questions. Maybe later I might be like, what were we running from? This is survival, right? We don't always have time to question what's going on. And when you're a little one, when you're a baby, you're a young person, you aren't even aware of the fact that there is another way to perceive things. Because in order to survive, you've got to trust that the people around you can see. All of us have Gemini somewhere in our charts. All of us have experienced this kind of gaslighting at somewhere and some point in our lives. And so as we complete this Gemini new moon and watch Mercury, the last planet, funnel through Gemini, we come to terms with, if we're paying attention, this fact of being gaslit continually. Do you trust that what you see is what actually is? That's the question, right? That's the question. I'm gonna draw some cards now. I got my Afro Tarot by Jesse Jumanji. I'm going to shuffle. This is for the collective, so this is not for individuals. Psychic ancestor. You don't have to have planets in Gemini to have Gemini in your birth chart. If you go to thepeoplesoracle.com and click Sidereal birth chart in the menu, you will be taken to a blog post with instructions. Those instructions will show you how to use the website astro.com to cast your sidereal birth chart. It's important that you follow all of the directions exactly as they're written. Don't skip any steps or leave anything out. Once you do that, you can find the house in your birth chart that has Gemini. I strongly suggest you get the 2021 Sidereal Astrology Guide because it gives a little bit more in-depth ways to understand what's going on right now in reference to your unique chart. You can go to thepeoplesoracle.com and click shop to get that. So I'm going to shuffle these cards, pull some cards, and after I pull some cards, I am going to take some questions. I think it was last week, whenever the beginning of July was, I went live and just talked and answered some questions. So if you were there, I'm going to do that again. Yeah, so let me just shuffle. What is the wisdom, insight, clarity, instruction as we move through this new moon phase? The card on the bottom is death. Yeah, sometimes it means literal death. Other times it means that it's over. Like there's no return. Literally no way to revive it. It's gone. It's over and done. This is irrevocable loss and change. Right? So this is the context, and the rest of the cards I draw will be referring back to this. 8 of Swords. Wheel of Fortune. 2 of Cups. Man, just real quickly, you know, that phrase that I'm always saying is what comes to my head. Survival is meant to be a shared burden, not an individual obligation. This Eight of Swords is a card that has come up a lot in all of the readings that I do here. And it's a card that really talks about the limits of the intellect and the limits of language. You know, if I had a word for the kind of collective dissociation and mania that we're experiencing, I would look at this Eight of Swords cards as understanding that there's only so much talk and conversation. There's only so many words. There's only so much you can read and seek out information. There's only so much you can think about something. You can't always think yourself to a conclusion. You can't always think yourself to a resolution. Sometimes you just spin yourself in circles, just thinking and thinking and thinking and talking and thinking and reading and thinking and talking and thinking. The intellect is a tool just like anything else. And tools have functions, right? The intellect is the capacity to imagine and to perceive. It's language and words. It's consciousness. But we all know that there's something that exists beyond consciousness. We all know the limitations of language. That language is an artifact of culture. They're symbols we use to talk about objects, ideas, and people. But sometimes the language that we have is not useful. The language that we have has too many limits. And so it's not a great tool to come to understanding things. The Eight of Swords asks us, what do you do when you have reached the limits of your mind? What do you do when your mind is no longer a useful tool to help you make sense of things? What happens when your capacity to discern and perceive truth has been undermined and gaslit so much that you cannot even trust your own mind? What are the stories your minds are telling you? What are the oft repeated phrases that come up for you that you constantly find yourself thinking? Have they gotten you anywhere? Have you resolved it? How much talk therapy can you get? The Eight of Swords says, all right, that's enough. Talk is great. Conversation is great. Seeking out other people's opinions, doing some research, a little Googles, all of that stuff has a function. But at some point, you have to recognize that your mind has done all that it can do. Often when we're in a state of Eight of Swords, we can feel frantic and we can feel stuck and we can feel locked up in our minds and we can feel like we're spiraling because we need a solution. Here comes the Wheel of Fortune. I think that card would be better called the Wheel of Fate. We think of fortune as something good that's bestowed upon us, but I've never seen this card actually mean that. With combinations of other cards it can, but I call it the wheel. And the wheel is about change. It's about cycles and seasons. Remember, the card on the bottom is death. Death is about irrevocable change. This is about the fact that we're not going back. Whatever is going on outside right now is not normal. Whatever is going on right now is not the world we were living in prior to January 2020. Whatever is going on in your life, whatever your job is doing, school, this is not normal. This is not a return to anything. That's gone. It's over. It's not coming back. And we can pretend for a little while longer. I'd probably say a couple weeks, if that. Maybe this week is the last week that we can pretend that somehow we're returning back to normal. somehow we had a president that said, make America great again. And the next president that came pretty much said the same thing, because he wants to go back to the capitalist oppression that we were living in the first place. He wants to recreate the circumstances and situations that let a few overlord the rest of us while we're struggling to feed ourselves, be clothed, stay warm, keep a roof over our heads, and protect our children. We are not going back. It's dead. It's in the graves with the people who died. It's over. They took it with them. Their lives are not in vain. Their death is not in vain, because what they took with them is our ability to return to what it was that took them. What kind of abomination, what kind of disrespect, what kind of demonic possession would possess us to try to recreate the exact same circumstances that got us to January 2020 in the first place? Go back to normal? What normal? It's dead. It's over. In your life, it's not coming back. Collectively, it's over. It's not coming back. How long do we have to sit and stare at a corpse before we realize that that thing is dead? It is devoid of life. There is no CPR or anything we can give it to make it come back. What happens when a person refuses to accept that someone or something has died? They sit there locked in the grief, stuck in denial, unable to move forward, unable to live. Is this what we want to do? We want to try and waste the precious time and resources we have left to recreate the very thing that brought us. This is why I know we're having a collective trauma response. This is why I know that what I'm watching is everyone trying to recreate the trauma of 2020, because no one came and said and validated that something really bad happened to us. Something terrible, many terrible things happened to us. The right use of words in this moment is to name the trauma, to call it out, to bring it out of the subconscious and recesses of our minds where it is controlling and driving us. Our souls and spirits want a resolution. Our souls and spirits are craving for somebody somewhere to come and say that some shitty ass shit happened. And until we can collectively, with adept and compassionate leadership, receive the acknowledgement that something has happened to us, we will continue just like the Vietnam War vets who come home constantly hearing gunshots in the fireworks and bombs in the slammed doors. We're going to continue recreating this trauma until somebody drags us up out of that shit and says, yo, wake up. Survival is meant to be a shared burden, not an individual obligation. And if you are left to your own devices without the emotional support, without the confirmation, where 2 or 3 are gathered. And I think what that means in this context is that where 2 or 3 are gathered, when we can come to an agreement about the truth that what has happened to us, we can be healed just by naming and recognizing, right? We talk about planting new ideas through conversation. We are conjuring up the language to articulate what happened to us. How do I know something happened to us? I'm watching it. The evidence is everywhere, right? 2 of Cups is about the attunement we have with each other. It is about the kind of immaterial, unquantifiable, emotional connection and vibe between us. That we are a species that appears to be full of individual people, but is actually a cohesive organism that moves pretty much in concert, just like a flock of birds. Just all it took was a few people to decide we're back to normal. And even those who might have had hesitations and reservations at the beginning are now at Disney World without masks. They're inside their churches unmasked. They're carrying their children who are not vaccinated into spaces with people who are dormantly carrying the virus, waiting to give it to their children, right? And so the attunement that we have with each other can be an attunement to walk off the edge of the cliff, right? It can also be the attunement to preserve, to share the burden of survival. And in this moment where we have enough air in the sky to imagine the possibility that we can attune ourselves to each other for the purpose of protection and safety, rather than for the purpose of preserving power and authority. Sometimes we need someone to come out and say, this bad thing happened. And it did not just happen to you, it happened to us. I felt it too. I was there. I saw it. Did you see it? Did you see what happened? What did it feel like to you? Continue to name what's going on. Continue to have conversations, shining a light on, recognizing the truth of what's happening. Otherwise, we'll succumb to the gaslighting that so many don't have the mental fortitude to avoid. God bless them. God bless them. The question box is open. Please put your questions in the question box. You can ask me for advice. You can ask me about a placement in your birth chart. You can ask me about something that I've said here today. You can ask me something about something that I've said in the past. You can ask me anything except for not my personal business, because mine's yours, right? So put your question into question box. Jada, I see you. It's so hard to talk about it because people call us fear mongering or negative, or it's isolating. Personally, call me a fear monger. Yes, I am absolutely afraid. I am afraid of making my son sick and killing my child. I am afraid of catching a virus that leaves me incapacitated. Yes, I am vaccinated. The likelihood of happening is low, but at the same time, I have a kid here who can't be. I'm absolutely afraid. You have to disarm people of the capacity to shame you over your feelings. They call you a fear monger. Yes, you are afraid. Now what? Now what? I don't want to live my life in fear. Very good. Take your no fear having ass up out of my house, off my phone, and I will see you on the other side of this shit, God willing. Take care. Right? I always talk about Scorpio, right? We're having eclipses in Scorpio and Taurus until May of 2022. And I always talk about Scorpio as you can survive in isolation. You cannot thrive. You're not going to have a good time. You're not going to be happy, but you can survive in isolation. And sometimes you need some time of isolation to survive some shit. And this is that moment. I said to y'all last year, you need to behave as if this will be this way forever. Not because it will, but because if you don't, you will always be vigilant and on edge, waiting for someone else to tell you that it's okay and safe. And if by now you don't realize that you cannot trust none of these hoes, I don't know what to tell you, friends. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I'm close friends with Saturn. Me and Saturn are homies. So when it comes to doing without, I got it. I'm good. I'm good. I will figure it out. I will be on my yoga mat doing down dog for 15 million breaths if I have to. I will be sitting here scrolling Twitter until my fingers fall off. Granted, I have the privilege to do that. I work for myself and I can stay home. Having an issue with finding the right career, how do you find it in your chart? So what you want to do is you want to get the Reading Your Sidereal Birth Chart workshop, and you want to just do the first couple of pages where it talks about prominent and dominant stuff. It talks about the tools and the tasks, right? So there's 3 little sections at the beginning: the tools and the tasks, and prominent and dominant planets. If you have a prominent element in your chart, which is a tool, you know that whatever that tool represents is something that you might be good at, right? So if it's air, language, words, communication, talking, speaking, listening, writing, researching, analyzing. If it's fire, this might be sports, this might be teaching, this might be academia, this might be using your intellectual faculties and ideas out in the world. It just might be being an agent of change in spaces that are stuck in the status quo. Sometimes it might mean doing physical work. If it's water, right? This might mean that you have an affinity for being in the public or on stage, drawing attention to yourself. If it's water, you might work in a family business. If it's water, you might be doing something with your own body. And then if it's earth I find is the most diverse, because if it's Virgo, we're talking about analysis and calculating. You could be a banker, a bank teller. You could be working as an administrative assistant. But I would definitely do that and figure out what elements are, what tools and tasks and planets are prominent. Please don't put questions on the timeline, or the comments. Please put questions in the question box. Thank you. Climate disaster makes me terrified of bringing children into this world. Honestly, I've been having this exact same thought. I'm getting to the space where it's like, okay, if I'm going to have one more kid, I want to do it in the next 2 to 3, 4 years. But at the same time, I feel terrified of bringing another child into this world. And not only for that child, but for the stress of having to parent in a country, in a world that literally hates children. It literally is willing to kill children, sterilize women. They're literally willing to kill off the human species. And so I don't know in good conscience if I could bring a child into the world. When it comes to stuff like that, that's a legitimate fear. That's not something to necessarily get over. I would say that you might be experiencing some ambivalence of having this double mind around whether or not to have children. And that's okay. Sit in the tension of that. Just sit there. Be there with those feelings. Those are valid. Maybe you might decide you don't want to have them. Maybe you will. But understand that is a valid fear. This is not like a fabricated fear mongering. This is real talk. So in circumstances like that, there's no quick fix band-aid to say get over your fear. Sit with it. Be with those feelings. Be with them. Let them do what they're going to do. They may pass, they may not. It may literally be unsafe for you to have a child in this world. Literally. And then what? Right? In a moment like this, it's really hard. I marvel at people who intentionally decided to get pregnant at this time, because in my mind, I'm just wow, y'all just have so much faith in humanity and the government. But then at the same time, I definitely think about my ancestors who still loved and created families and got pregnant and shared and celebrated, even though they were under the most oppressive and violent regime that has ever existed in history, right? Somehow they still did it. So I don't know. I don't have a quick answer for that, but yeah. The question box is the question mark at the bottom. I've been thinking about strategy. I know now what. This is spiritual warfare I'm trying to preserve. I'm not exactly clear on your question, but as far as I'm concerned, the mantra, the guidance that I think is forever relevant to this moment is that survival is meant to be a shared burden, not an individual obligation. How are you sharing the burden of survival? It doesn't have to be a big orchestration. You don't have to be building a commune or buying property or growing a farm or anything like that. Sometimes it's recognizing that you got a little bit more than someone else and you could spare a few. Any favorite books regarding sidereal astrology? Hi, you must be new here. Welcome. My name is Dayna Lynn Nuckolls, the People's Oracle, also known as the Sidereal Astrologer. When it comes to a sidereal astrology framework that is not duplicating the tropical framework, borrowing their interpretations, or copying and appropriating Vedic astrology, that did not exist before me. This is not 13 sign astrology either. What I've done here is innovative and new. So when it comes to resources for what I do, I have them and I've created them. My Twitter account is like an encyclopedia. It is 5 or 6 years old. Any astrological thing that you can think of, go to Twitter, type People's Oracle, my handle, in the search box with whatever it is that you are wanting to know. I'm certain I've tweeted about it. You can also do the same thing at my blog, thepeoplesoracle.com. When it comes to books and resources, I have plenty on my website. My favorite is my annual Sidereal Astrology Guide. I published the first of these in 2018. So 2022 Sidereal Astrology Guide would be the 5th edition of my guide. This is an annual Sidereal Astrology calendar, workbook, journal, and reference, right? So what you do with this is you follow the instructions for casting your sidereal birth chart and you fill in the information as instructed. There is no prerequisite astrological knowledge required to use this. If you can read and follow directions, you can do this. This is meant to be mindless. The only thing that requires thought is your memory, remembering things that have happened during the months, dates, and times that I ask about. Okay? The other things that I recommend from my shop are the Reading Your Sidereal Birth Chart workshop. I walk you through the fundamentals that I use when I read a client's birth chart. I show you how to calculate the most important planet and prominent planet in your birth chart and what that means. I talk to you about elements and modes and what those means. I call them tools and tasks. I break down what a planet and a sign and house is in plain information, no vibes, no energy. I'm talking about real practical things that you can use. Every single thing that I create is meant to be used without any prerequisite knowledge. All of my products are self-containing, so you don't have to start anywhere. If you want to start here, you can start here. If you want to start with the workshop, you can start with the workshop. I'm constantly referencing these all the time because, as you see, I actually use this myself, right? So again, go to thepeoplesoracle.com. There's a blog there with a crap load of information. You can click shop, and in my online shop, you'll see this in a printed and bound version, the 2021 Sidereal Astrology Guide, as well as a digital PDF that you can download immediately. You'll see the Reading Your Sidereal Birth Chart workshop, which is a 90-minute lecture, including slides and worksheets, walking you through the fundamentals of reading your sidereal birth chart and using it. I also have an ebook on the houses that talks about why do the houses mean what they mean? Coming to understand that Aries and the first house in Mars are not synonymous unless you are Aries rising. So there's got to be another logic to how the houses work and what they mean. And I talk about that in that book. So again, I am the sidereal astrologer. There are other people who call themselves sidereal astrologers, but those sidereal astrologers are likely 100% of the time copying the tropical and duplicating the tropical framework. So they've changed the calculation of the zodiac, but not the philosophical, spiritual, and political framework for how they use astrology. Or they are appropriating Vedic astrology, which is an Indian-made astrology rooted in the Vedas and very specific to Indian culture, class issues, right? So the sidereal astrology that I do is about the class, the race, the gender, the sexual identity, the economic and the political things that we're confronting here. There is no out there. All of it is connected. So also, I've got a YouTube channel. I've got an Instagram page with so much information. A lot of it is free. Okay, so there you are. Thank you. Can you elaborate on the upcoming support group? Absolutely. So July 18th, which is a week from today, Sunday, I will be facilitating the first of hopefully a few more Saturn in Capricorn support sessions. Why do we need a Saturn in Capricorn support session? Well, Saturn entered Capricorn January 23rd, 2020. Within 24 hours, Wuhan alarmed the entire world by shutting down because the pandemic was raging through that province, making people really, really, really sick. That same weekend, as if some kind of ominous foreshadowing of what was to come, Kobe Bryant and his daughter Gigi suddenly died in a plane crash. The grief that washed over us collectively was palpable. And soon we would learn that grief is something that we would be wrestling with for the next 2.5 years and beyond. The last time Saturn was in Capricorn was 1990 to 1993. This was at the time where we were finally grasping what was going on with AIDS and HIV. It had spread beyond just gay men into the Black community, the Hispanic community, and elsewhere. And we were finally getting the language and the courage, and we were forced to figure out what this thing was. We did not reach the peak. That curve of HIV AIDS related deaths did not start to trail off until 2003. So that was most of the 80s, all of the 90s, into the 00s, the 2000s. Here we are again, confronting the reality of death and grief, forced into a kind of resourcefulness that our privilege has left us unable to cope. There are many of us who are having our first Saturn return and our second Saturn return. Our first Saturn return would be if you were born sometime between 90 and 93, and then 61 and 63, I believe, you'd be having your second Saturn return. I will post in my stories and on Twitter the dates for your Saturn return. So whether or not you're having your Saturn return, this particular transit of Saturn in Capricorn is absolutely generation changing. And so this support group is meant to help us learn how to Saturn. The first support group, we are going to be analyzing Saturn in our birth chart. We are going to be talking about the aspects that Saturn makes to planets in our chart. And if we have time, we'll also get to putting together our Saturn story. I might leave the Saturn story for our for the second group, but at the very least, we're going to be spending the first support session just talking about WTF Saturn is, why it is so relevant to have some kind of understanding of that, and then getting into the details of what it means in our birth chart. Why? Because while Saturn is in Capricorn, it is activating your natal Saturn. Whatever Saturn is doing in your birth chart by sign, by house, by aspects, it is happening. It's going down right now. It is in focus. For example, I've got Saturn in Libra in the 9th house. In the 11th house with my Mars. So of course my audience has been growing and expanding. Absolutely. I've had lots of helpful people coming along wanting to bring me opportunities and sharing their resources with me. But also because Saturn is conjunct my 5th house ruler, I've had a lot of challenges with my child. And so these two things are kind of happening together here. Then we can talk about where Saturn is even transiting in your birth chart. Where is Capricorn? So these are the things that we're going to be talking about in the first workshop. If there's only a few slots left, so if you want to participate, go, I didn't even put it on my blog. You can click the link in my bio, and the link to register is there. I will retweet it on my timeline right now. Hold on. So I'm just retweeting it on my timeline right now. It's $25. It's going to be about an hour and a half or so. And yeah, all right. What's the deal with your Mercury? Because you have the clearest and most eloquent speech ever. Well, first of all, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. This is not something that you can see very clearly. And recognizing this about myself, my adeptness with language, has made me continue to stare at my chart and kind of tease out what's going on. I don't know if I can explain this in simple terms, but I'll do my best. First, the most important thing about Mercury in my chart is that it is in the same sign as my sun. Okay, so when you have one other planet in the same sign as your sun, this planet is like turned all the way up. It gets the light and power of the sun. It does not matter if it's on top of the sun or at opposite ends of the sign. If there is one planet only in the same sign as your sun, that planet is going to get supercharged. For me, that's Mercury. Now, the most important thing though is where is Saturn, right? Because if my Mercury is in Capricorn, I need to know where Saturn is. And if Saturn is in a place that it's well equipped to do things, then my Mercury is going to have access to words and language and all of these things. Well, my Saturn is exalted in Libra. So it's in the 10th sign from my Mercury being in the position of power. Saturn is exalted in Libra. Exaltation is having access to special tools without the responsibility. I can explain that another way, but the long and short of it is that my Mercury is in the same sign as my sun, and my Saturn that's ruling my Mercury and my sun is exalted in the most elevated position in my chart. Don't sleep on Saturn when it comes to writing and words and language. Go look at the charts of Toni Morrison, Angela Davis, Maya Angelou, and Octavia Butler, and go tell me if you see any Saturn signs in their chart, okay? And the only other way that rule doesn't necessarily work is if the sign is Leo. So if you have one other planet in the same sign as your sun, but your sun is in Leo, it's kind of flipped, right? Thank y'all. How should I manage my Gemini in the 10th house with Mercury? Are you saying that you have Mercury in Gemini in the 10th house? I don't know that that's something that you can manage. I mean, if you're Virgo rising, then that's you. And then you're probably writing, speaking, teaching, analyzing, doing something with words or data analytics, communication, PR, social media. So it doesn't need to be managed. You're doing it. It can also be that you have multiple mother figures. So that might be a challenge of managing those relationships. And if that's the case, I would be thinking about boundaries with mother figures. Other than that, I don't really know what you mean. Okay. You're welcome. So you're basically teaching people to read their charts rather than reading their charts for them. Close, but no cigar. I am teaching people to use astrology. And you don't have to know a whole bunch before you use astrology. I'm not teaching you how to read your chart in here. If you learn how to read your chart as a passive benefit, great. But I'm teaching you how to use astrology, right? In the Reading Your Sidereal Birth Chart workshop, I'm not saying Sun in this means this and Mercury here means this. I'm teaching you how to understand what WTF or how you became the person that you become as shown by your chart, right? If that makes sense. It's almost like the best way to learn a language is to just be using it. The best way to learn a language is not to sit down and start memorizing words. We all learn language by being spoken to and listening to. This is learning the language of astrology by using it, right? That's the difference. I don't have any, piecemeal Sun and this means that, because I don't really think that's useful. So here you go. Thank you for speaking on the wound of Gemini. I've been standing up for myself lately and I had no idea why it felt so foreign to me. Yeah, Mars, this is one of my favorite things. Like I be pulling this thing out all the time. You see this? So each calendar layout has like glyphs telling you aspects and stuff, but I actually explain what all of the events are in a month here. So I love to go look at this year at a glance in the guide and figure out stuff. So I'm going to the year in a glance because I can't remember what day Mars entered Gemini. So Mars entered Gemini April 13th. So Saint Milan, Mars enters Gemini April 13th. And pretty much since then, like Mars set some shit off. And we've been dealing with the fallout and consequences of that since then. I think Mercury still has to go over some of all of that. So we're still dealing with it. But Mars really set the status quo for what we would be dealing with in terms of the rest of the transits through Gemini. So kudos to you for your boundaries, boo. Hi, thank you for doing this. I have Saturn in Aries retrograde, 6th house. Is there some kind of way that comes to mind to best channel the rage and justice that comes along with this placement? So this is one of those questions where you've made a whole lot of assumptions that prevents me from actually accurately answering your question. Having Saturn in Aries is not a source of rage. If I want to know why you're angry, I would look at your Mars. So I need you to reformulate your question because I can't answer it. How do you start tapping into the gifts of your houses? I have 6 placements in the 12th house and just get dizzy thinking about it. That's a really tough question because how questions are always related to time. And without really seeing your chart, I can't really properly parse out what time periods are relevant and why. So unfortunately, that's not really a question that I can answer here. Sorry. Any advice for people who have prominent Saturn yet struggle with time management and discipline? So, I don't know what you mean by prominent Saturn. If you're using my language, I'm assuming you mean that Saturn is on your midheaven, your ascendant, or 7th house cusp, the descendant. So you have to tell me what you mean by prominent, because that is a very specific word that I use to mean a planet that is conjunct the ascendant or midheaven or seventh house cusp. And also, the answer to that question is very dependent upon age. So I would need to know how old you are too. Does having a planet in retrograde affect a person's chart? If so, how? Whew, I just love how y'all be doing the best you can with words. Everything is in your chart is a part of your story. There's nothing in your chart that's not a part of your story. In terms of a retrograde planet, you know, what is the information that it can give you? It really depends, you know. For me, if we're specifically talking about Mercury or Venus or even Mars, then I would actually be less concerned with trying to extrapolate some specific natal chart meaning from that planet. And I would be more interested in what was literally going on during that planet's retrograde cycle during your mom's pregnancy, or likely after you were born as well. There's a story there that's real time. And the real time story is about something that was actually happening. It's not about some fixed conception or theory or idea of what a retrograde planet means. A retrograde planet means that that planet stopped and started going backwards through the zodiac. And when it stopped and started going backwards through the zodiac, something was happening in the lives of the people around you that's directly related to your birth and your conception and all of those things, okay? Can you please give any insights on Moon in the 10th house, Scorpio Moon? I can. Any planet in the 10th house is the boss. Sorry, ain't nothing you can do about it. When we're talking about Moon in the 10th house, we're talking about your mama. What I suggest you to do is go to my profile page and scroll not too far, and you should see an image that says Sidereal Scorpio Moon, and I want you to read that and answer the questions. But it talks about having to abandon your mother and family in order to preserve yourself. It may also be talking about your mother having to abandon you, or your mother having to leave her own family, home, land, country, you know, neighborhood in order to preserve her own life. And so the questions have to do with how did that affect you, right? How does the sidereal ascendant differ from tropical? Tropical says that your ascendant is a mask you wear and it's not the real you. It says it's some kind of persona that's just a fake cover for who you really are. I totally disagree. In sidereal, the ascendant and the first house and any planets there is literally the only part of the chart that's actually you. Every other house and planet in your birth chart at any given time are other people in your life. My primary kind of axiom for understanding astrology is that planets are people first, and then people are not always you, right? Sidereal astrology is the study of relationships. You didn't just fall out of the sky. And so when I look at placements in your birth chart, I'm less concerned with the what and more concerned with the why and how, which requires me to identify what planets represent who in your life. And it requires me to have an understanding of time in astrology to understand when and how these people, places, and things are relevant. So the first house in sidereal astrology is you, your physical body, actions you take, and things that happen to you. When we're talking about your personality or your temperament or your appearance, the first house and the sign there, any planets there, its ruler, that is the most you part of the chart, okay? How did you come to formulate your sidereal framework? Was it through experimentation with other charts? So this is partially in connection with the question someone asked me about my Mercury. I have a lot of Saturn and Jupiter in my chart, but I have a lot of Saturn by way of Capricorn and Libra. And one of the things that kind of has always informed how I approach things is that I'm not interested in theory, and I'm not interested in reading what other people have to say primarily. What I'm primarily interested in is observing how things function. I don't want to know what someone's idea of them is, because as soon as we start getting to ideas, we have to take into context the political, religious, and historical context for why someone would even say that. And if that political, historical, or religious context is not relevant to my present moment, that information generally isn't useful to me. So there's going to be some overlap where things remain the same. However, I'm interested in observing what things are by seeing how they function, right? I want to look and see, what is this actually doing? This is how I come with most of my stuff. The other piece is that this was a revelation. I can't explain to you the logistics and the process. All I know is that I met an elder who told me that I should be using the sidereal zodiac in 2011. And in 2014, I started using the sidereal zodiac, and I looked for information on how to use it. And all I could see was people who were just repeating stuff in tropical, but it just didn't make sense that that would work. And so I just stared at charts and read charts and watched how things worked in real time, but also have been blessed to cultivate a very deep connection with spirit, where I just be hearing things and they tell me stuff. And a lot of the things that come to me, yes, I'm obsessed and I read and study charts all the time, but also like spirit be talking to me. My ancestors be talking to me. And when they tell me stuff, I write it down and I go say it. And I really don't have any hesitation or like nervousness about saying stuff that I haven't heard other people say. Like, I just have a lot of audacity in that sense. And I have a lot of audacity in the sense of willing to put predictions out there and be wrong. And most of the time I'm not. So I don't know. That was a great question, though. Are you interested in or thinking about writing a larger reference book? Maybe someday. I don't know. I mean, I think for me, I like speaking. I love speaking. I love talking. I come from a whole line of preachers, grew up in the Pentecostal church, speaking in tongues, being baptized in the name of Jesus, like shouting, dancing, all of that stuff. And so like the religious kind of toolkit and upbringing that I bring to this work is really about a liberation framework. And one thing that I do know, hey Keem, you just be right on time. One thing that I do know about this work that I do is that if you listen, it's so simple. It's like it's so simple that the simplicity conceals the complexity of what you can get from it. It's so simple. It's so simple that once you just like use the guide, you're great, right? So I don't really know that a reference book is useful. I mean, maybe one day somebody will gather up all of the recordings from my readings and live videos and tweets and blog posts and guides, and they'll put it all together and make it something. Yes, of course you would, Keem. But you know, I call what I do divination for liberation. So first, recognizing that this is divination. I know a lot of astrologers, especially the white ones, have spent a lot of time trying to strip any kind of spiritual or religious mandate from their work. They've also tried to hold on to the myth of free will as some kind of principle that keeps them from making accurate predictions. But I think that they're just using the wrong zodiac, number one. Number two, their religion is capitalism, and it just doesn't vibe with the idea that there is no such thing as free will. And number three, where I come from, you know, divination means to divine, and it requires some kind of connection to God. So I understand why they don't see it as a tool of divination, because they don't have any spiritual mandate or connection to God. They don't think God exists. You know, they're completely cut off from their ancestors, and they're so colonized that they don't even remember the gods and the rituals and the tools and the prayers and the poems and the languages that was stripped from them when they became white. So of course they don't see this as a tool of divination. They want to hold on to free will because free will makes them feel like one day they're going to win capitalism. And honestly, divination for liberation is not about winning capitalism. It's about dismantling any institution or struggle, or any institution or system that is marginalizing and oppressing people. And so, I don't know, man. Right? So divination means I am divining. That means that this is not just an intellectual thing of words that I could write down and make it formulaic. This requires a connection to God, your ancestor, spirit, the universe. One thing I've learned being an astrologer is that you got to be quick on your feet. If you're relying on significations from 50 years ago, you're missing it. What do you do when a deadly pandemic comes and you've relied on the ninth house to mean traveling, but ain't nobody traveling? What's the ninth house mean then? What does it mean when classes are shut down? What does it mean when you're not gathering at the church? How do you have a flexible, living and breathing word that informs your practice? You can't do that if you stuck on what some white man said 100 years ago. And honestly, that's not even why I'm here. Astrology, tarot, all of these tools I use are just the cover. I don't need them. When I open my mouth, God starts talking to me in my ear and I just say it. I don't think about it. Nothing that I've said here today was premeditated. None of the answers to the questions that I've given are premeditated. Yes, I may repeat some things that I've said in the past because they're relevant, but there is no premeditation here. This is channeling. This is literally in the moment. The words are coming out of my mouth and I'm saying them and I'm not in control of it. So when it comes to like following a kind of standard of legitimacy that has been defined by capitalism and whiteness, this is an oral tradition. You feel what I'm saying? Because what I said 2 weeks ago, I might have an update and that may be irrelevant now. Stuff I said on my Twitter in 2016, I may have evolved and changed. And once I write in a book, that loses the capacity to write and change. And finally, if I sit down and start writing a book, I won't be able to do this. And this is what I'm supposed to be doing right here. So if you want to know what I'm saying, get your own notebook out and write it as it comes down, because I promise you, I'm probably not going to remember unless I come back and watch this video, because whatever I said it was a living and breathing word for this moment. So I didn't mean to go off on you look at my lungs, but I just needed for folks to understand what it is that I'm doing here. I'm not an academic. I did not research. I don't have a PhD. I have a bachelor's degree in vocal jazz. I'm a singer. I'm a musician. Y'all see my instruments over there. I play flute. I write, compose, arrange, I act. That's what I do. But this right here, like, this is purely spirit. This is an oral tradition, and oral traditions require you to listen and not read. The funny thing too is that, like, this is colonizer language, and I'm just trying to make the best use of this language. These white people forced on my ancestors to say some things that transcend the capacity of this language to even embody. So that's why you just got to be in the moment, because the way that it hits you, I could say a word 5 different times on 20 different occasions and it's going to hit different, because in that moment where you were, what we were tapped into, the accord that we were on is going to make that word, meaning a singular word or a word as in revelation, means something different, right? So, you know, you just got to be plugged in, man. Man, white people have just trained us so good that ideas aren't legitimate unless they're published. And that's just not true. Thank God for social media, because I can come and do this thing without any gatekeeping for the most part. So that's that on that. I'm going to answer a couple more questions because I've been on here. Oh, I'm doing pretty good. I've only been on here for an hour and a half. Okay, well, we're going to wrap this up soon. This is a good one. One day I'll probably do a workshop. So look at my lungs, honey. Let me tell you something. You have a deeper capacity for knowing than you give yourself credit for. You don't need to know the individual meanings of words for your body to have grasped the truth that resonates with you. You don't need to have Merriam-Webster or English Oxford Dictionary's definition of a word for your spirit to find resonance with what I'm saying. Words are just a cover. Astrology is just a cover. Them tarot cards or that Chinese astrology is just a cover. Trust yourself. Trust yourself that you can know and understand without the medium of words in the way. Understand that the spiritual power of what happens when we all come together transcends all of this shit. It transcends all of this shit. You understand what I'm saying? Blooming Boy asked, what information can you receive from North and South Node? So this is something that I want to talk about in depth at some point, but I'll try to give a concise thing here. The first thing to understand about the North and South Node is that these are not actual planetary objects or celestial bodies. These are not things that are actually tangible and material. The North and South nodes are calculated points, meaning they are calculating the point where the sun and moon's orbits intersect. So that means you need to know what the sun and moon are in order to understand what the North and South node are. The sun is father and fathering, the conscious mind and the intellect. The moon is mother and mothering the body. These things are fused with one. You cannot have consciousness without a body, and you cannot have body without consciousness. Even if you have consciousness without a body, somebody else's body is picking up on, channeling, and perceiving that consciousness. And you cannot have a body without consciousness. Otherwise, it's just an empty sack of nothing, right? So when we look at the North and South node, we're really examining something about the relationship between the mother and the father. Secondly, the North and South nodes tell us the North and South node tell us where the eclipses were during the time of your gestation and birth. So this is real events that were happening. The signs of the North and South node, give or take, I want to say it's 13 degrees on either side, will tell you where an eclipse was. So for example, you could have your North node at 28 degrees Aries and your South node at 28 degrees Libra. And that can mean that while your mother was pregnant with you, eclipses were actually in Scorpio and Taurus. But maybe sometime after your birth, eclipses would be in Aries and Libra. I'm gonna leave it there, but just know that the North node represents mother and the South node, that's Sidereal, y'all. Just know that the North node represents mother and the South node represents father. And what you're looking for is, when were the actual eclipses while your mom was pregnant? What is the sign those were in? What are the rulers of those signs, and where are they in your birth chart? What were the eclipses during the first 6 months of your life, right? These are real things that are happening that are telling you something fundamental about your parents' relationships as it relates to your life. I've seen the North and South node tell me things about the father's relationship with his own mother and family. I've seen the North and South node be telling me a story about the fact that the mother was in school, and so they sent the child away to live with the grandmother in another country. Like, I can look at the North node and South node in your chart and tell you what your parents were doing and what was going on in their relationship while your mother was pregnant with you, right? And so this is the key to the generational story, right? Because of the circumstances around their relationship and the individual things that they were dealing with. This is the environment that you were conceived, gestated, and birthed in. This environment is key to understanding yourself. You can't just look and say, oh, well, I was sent away to live with my grandmother. If you go back and look at the North and South nodes, you can find the exact circumstance as to why that would happen. No, you won't get all of this from the calendar. The calendar is specific to just 2021. So this is the calendar. Here's November. November has Gliss, that's a new moon. This is Mercury changing sign. You see here, you got Mercury conjunct Mars, square Saturn, Mercury square Saturn in Libra, eclipse here. Here's a monthly summary, just giving you a big picture of what's happening. And then these are questions that you answer in the guide. Okay? So this is specifically to 1 year. This is not necessarily to read your birth chart. This is to be like, the new moon is in Gemini. What does that mean for me personally? And then you use this workbook to do that. Okay? I'm looking here. Whew, this is big. Hold on, let me drink some water. That's so deep. Samaria. Mid-20s dreamer says young people with prominent Leo often downplay their father issues. Any advice on helping navigating them? So Spirit has really been laying some stuff on me about abandonment by the father, neglect by the father. We talk a lot about violence from men. We talk about a lot about the abuse that fathers inflict on children and mothers and families. But we do not talk about the wound of being abandoned and neglected by the father. We don't talk about that. And the reason why people downplay it is because we literally do not have language for that. Even clinically, we do not even have any diagnoses that really have to do with abandonment by the father. Even when we look at the literature and research around mother-child relationships and parent-child relationships, there's nothing that talks about the kind of depression, the kind of anxiety, the kind of isolation and lack of sense of direction and purpose that comes with being neglected by the father. So the first thing to really understand is just to understand that if your father was absent physically or emotionally, that is trauma. You deserved to have a father and to be fathered. That's the first place to start. Now, you can tell a story and say that it didn't affect you, but I'm certain it did. We don't talk about the depressive episodes and the stagnancy in our lives that comes from the fact that we had no one to validate us. Even if you cannot personally resonate, with issues around the father, understand that culturally, it's such a norm that it's hard to even see it as an issue, right? For me, if we look collectively, the biggest evidence of father issues have to do with how we make celebrities and political leaders surrogates for parents. We want the celebrities to see us. We want their validation. We want them to tell us good job. We want them to encourage our risk taking. We want them to acknowledge our gifts. We want them to pat us on the head and say, I see you. I'm so proud of you. You're doing such a great job. What happens when you don't get that kind of validation? What happens when your father's presence or love requires you to erase yourself and to be who he wants you to be? What happens when your father's presence in your life is dependent upon you choosing a certain career path, school, or major? What happens when your father's presence requires you to embody gender or sexuality in a very specific way? What happens when your father literally ignores you and acts like you don't exist? If we were to rely on the cultural status quo around these things, we would be left to believe that you do not need a father. A father is optional at best and unnecessary at worst. When in fact, all of us are over here suffering. We don't know what we need to do. We don't feel capable. We cover up our wounds of being abandoned and neglected by father. Look at all the men out there beating their chest, and bravado and all of the hubris and arrogance is just covering up the fact that nobody ever told them, hey, I see you, great job. I love you. You're doing great. Go out there and do it. I'll support you no matter what. They cover that up with the beating of the chest, with the making money, with the seeking fame, with overpowering women and children and people they deem weaker. Those are daddy issues. You stuck and cannot get out of your house because you have social anxiety. Who told you that you could not take up space? Maybe nobody told you that you could not take up space, but maybe it's that you literally were treated like you did not exist. And so you recoiled into yourself and your imagination. And so now when it's time to go out and actually be social, you can't even trust that the you that people are seeing is you. You can't even feel safe around other people because no one ever said it's okay for you to take up space. You were required to shrink yourself and erase yourself in order to be seen by your father. Maybe he didn't even see you at all, right? You don't believe that you can do anything. You don't believe that you're capable of anything. You don't believe that any risk is worth taking. You can't even hype yourself up and tell yourself that you're looking bad as hell today, or you did that. Constantly humbling yourself. No sense of pride in who you are and what you're capable of. That's daddy issues. Daddy issues doesn't always look like what we think it looks like. If you cannot take up space, if you have no healthy sense of self-esteem and dignity, if you're letting people run all over you, that's daddy issues. That's daddy issues. So let's talk about it. Right? We're about to be confronting this stuff. It's coming up. It's coming up. Okay? With these Leo transits coming. It's coming up. And we're going to be confronted the same way that we've been all up in our feelings and our bodies with these Cancer transits. These Leo transits are coming, and we need to confront our collective daddy issues. We need to confront the fact that Biden is not our daddy, and neither is 45. And we don't need their approval. We do not need to respect their authority or the position that's daddy issues too. When you go to church and you give yourself completely over to that pastor and his judgment telling you what to eat and drink, cults are daddy issues. Cults are daddy issues. And the biggest cult there is the cult of individualism, which engenders capitalism, racism, misogyny, queer phobia. The biggest cult is the cult of individualism, having no sense of the real limitations that exist for us, thinking that everything is in our control and everything we're responsible for. Daddy issues are thinking that if you can touch it and see it, that's the only way to know that it's real. If you can't see it, measure it, quantify it, put it in a spreadsheet, double blind clinical trial it, then it doesn't exist. That's daddy issues too. I think that's a good place to stop. I was about to answer another question, but I think that's a good way to stop. I've been here for 1 hour, 41 minutes and 53 seconds and counting. If you want to participate in the Saturn support session #1, you can go to my Twitter page. It's right there. You can click the link in my bio. It's July 18th. If there's more demand, I may open up more slots, but whatever's there, you all can have. If you want the 2021 Sidereal Astrology Guide, go to thepeoplesoracle.com and click shop. Download all of that. No, the support group will not be recorded. You're either there or you're not. This is not one of those things. It's a support group. It's not a course. It's not a workshop. It's a support group. We're going to be talking, sharing, and all of that stuff. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Please share this with your friends. Take screen records of your favorite parts and put it up on your social media so that other people can share in this goodness. Don't forget to tag me in your reflections on Twitter and on Instagram. Feel free to share it to TikTok. I don't care. Share it and do that. Appreciate you guys so much. Psychic Ancestor, you're so cute. I just want to give you a hug because you must be new. Is this live every week? No, this was for the new moon. I'll hopefully do another for the full moon. I definitely will because that's a big one. And then I just come on here randomly every now and then. So yeah, peace out, y'all. Enjoy your week. Stay safe. Be good to you. Remember that survival is meant to be a shared burden, not an individual obligation. Don't beat yourself up for not being able to feed yourself, clothe yourself, house yourself, work a job, do fun things, start a hustle, work out, pet your cat, walk your dog, have sex, fall in love, and feed your plants. It's all too much. You weren't meant to do any of that on your own. And so every time you find yourself feeling incapable or beating yourself up for that, repeat to yourself, survival is meant to be a shared burden, not an individual obligation. And let that mantra seep into your subconscious and guide you to the people who will share the burden of survival with you. And I pray those people become your family and your kin. I pray that you all protect each other and share the resources that you have. I pray that you all care for each other's children children, care for each other when you're ill, give housing, shelter, rides, whatever is needed. This is where we're headed, and this is where we need to be. Y'all take care.